Morning everyone, my name's Nicole and I'll be hosting the webinar for you today. Thank you for joining our Microsoft Azure experts, Mark Lomas and David Cox, for the first in a series of 3 Azure webinars. October is Program's Exploring Azure Cloud Webinar Month, and today's webinar topic is Making a Start with Azure. For those organisations shifting from on-premises mindset to a cloud mindset, Mark and David's sessions focus on the many business benefits of cloud and the typical cloud adoption triggers, particularly around flexibility, control, cost savings, and protection. Before we start, I just want to draw your attention to the Q&A tab. If you've got any questions during the presentation, please feel free to write them down in there and we'll answer them after the presentation. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our 2 speakers today, Mark Lomas and David Cox, both of whom are seasoned Microsoft Azure experts. So now I'll hand over to David Cox, who will start us off with our Making a Start with Azure webinar. Over to you, David.
Great, good morning, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. And this morning we're going to dip our toes into the Azure platform. So hopefully you'll all be seeing my slides in just a moment. Wonderful. And during this, obviously, as Nick said, feel free to pop your questions in the chat. We'll definitely get to those later on. Now, the key thing here is I'm intending to make this more around problem solving and positioning rather than going too heavy into products, which hopefully will relieve some of you. I know Microsoft changed the naming convention for a lot of licensing every few weeks or months, so hopefully the lack of terminology in that respect will be a bit of a relief. And yeah, we'll start with the fundamentals. So first, let's kind of circle back and look at cloud from a much higher level. What is it? We'll hear all sorts of hot takes from Gartner and large public cloud providers, but fundamentally, it's just a different approach. It's another way of us delivering solutions and managing our environments. And I think the main difference being that things can be managed remotely rather than having to patch, manage, power, cable manage everything on site. Been talking to a lot of customers particularly over the last few months now that things have opened up in person, and I'm hearing things about 11-week lead times on hardware, which I can imagine is a big challenge that resonates with all of you, and it's something that we can overcome with cloud. We don't have those lead times to contend with, which is welcome, and we can also manage user devices and accounts without that device or person being present in a building. I imagine many of you will have embraced some form of hybrid working. So again, it lends itself well to that. Something we should be clear on, though, is that from a service point of view, you can do everything that you would have been doing with hardware, just the same with cloud. We often see the maybe 50% or so of a kind of infrastructure map when it's mapped to Azure will be VMs, just like it would be with physical hardware. So I know there's a bit of a mystique. Microsoft do a very good job of marketing cloud and Azure, but in reality, we're sort of doing the same thing. The kit's just somewhere else. It becomes Microsoft's problem. The powering, which is, I suppose, a increasingly contentious issue at the moment. Again, that becomes Microsoft's headache. And they've committed to, they're already carbon neutral, and they're aiming to be carbon negative by, I think, the end of 2030, or was it 2040? I heard someone there speaking about it not so long ago. So it's going to be a high hill for them to climb, especially in the current climate, but it's something that wouldn't be a stress for you, which is, I think, nice. And if we look at that evolution away from bare metal, we've put virtualization, whether it's Hyper-V, VMware, on that physical hardware. But it's essentially being plonked in a data center in London or in Cardiff with cooling and security, all that James Bond retina scanning security measures, but you don't have to fund that for your server room. You can just have it on their site instead. And we're also seeing a higher uptake of hybrid computing these days. I think most people end up in that situation. I know a lot of you. There's been a very strong uptake with 365 and EMS and those licensing features from the team at ProBrand. But some of you may have your infrastructure still on premise, so you'd fit in that sort of hybrid computing or hybrid IT umbrella. You're dabbling with cloud and perhaps got some stuff left on premise, and I don't blame you. Domain controllers, right? Um, most people still have the domain controllers on premise. It doesn't matter how much software and PaaS services they're utilizing, so I can understand that. Now, a few of you might be reserved about cloud, and maybe you're facing challenges like you got legacy applications perhaps that are kind of critical to the organization. I know like legal and financial particularly tend to have apps like this where they aren't compatible with Windows 10 or 11, which becomes a challenge and maybe you feel as a blocker to moving into Azure. But what's quite nice about the platform is if you move some workloads in there, you can roll back to a legacy operating system. But Microsoft will give you extended support, and that will last. They certainly haven't committed to less than another full year. But otherwise, you'd be a bit more exposed to attack. Most of Microsoft's monetary innovation is going into their cloud stuff. So you may remember there was that Exchange breach a year or so ago. That wasn't Exchange Online. That was like legacy versions. And so I know there's pressure to be moving. And if that is a blocker, well, that's a way of addressing it. You can actually run say, Windows 7, for example, and keep your extended support. Might also have some aging infrastructure. Perhaps you're sweating a hardware refresh that was 4 or 5 years ago. And perhaps in the next 6 months or so, you'll be looking at the TCO comparisons between putting some of those workloads into cloud or perhaps doing a full refresh. And like I said, whether it's domain controllers or an internal application that for whatever reason is not going to run well in cloud, I understand why most people wouldn't necessarily jump and be fully cloud-based, but there might be opportunities to effectively have less hardware running, repurpose the servers that you do have, save on your energy bills, and have a bit more cash flow by paying for stuff monthly. And it also addresses the lack of agility I touched on earlier. We're not worrying about hardware lead times if we do put workloads there. Something we often see, Mark and I were discussing this recently, was that you can probably see I've butchered Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, so sorry, any philosophy fans. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that often we're so, and understandably because of lead time challenges, but we're so fixated on the hardware layer when we're looking at renewal and things like that, that often the software and apps and things can become a bit of an afterthought. Perhaps you're sold on some EMS security features, but you've got to wait 6 months till you've got more budget. And one thing I like about the approach that Mark and the team at ProRun have is that they will look at this all up like a more holistic level. So if you're not already having those conversations, I definitely encourage it because it would hopefully make the next refresh just a little bit more seamless for you. So let's go through some of the benefits to cloud. I've kind of talked about agility. We've got scalability and things. Essentially everything on this screen I'm going to touch on in much more detail over the next 40 minutes or so before I pass over to Mark. Flexibility is great. I mean, we saw this during the pandemic. There was a big uptake of things like Azure Virtual Desktop, which is Microsoft's remote working solution. And that's something we'll be exploring in the second webinar next week. And it really revolutionized productivity and home working. But I understand the reticence some people have about Azure because it can be a little bit challenging to pin down a realistic estimate of the monthly costs. And that's something that both mine and Mark's teams, we collaborate closely on kind of fine-tuning that pricing. For governance or compliance, Microsoft have got over 90 ISO certifications. Some of you will be very familiar, maybe too familiar with ISOs because we sometimes we have to be compliant with various ones for the verticals we're in. And you may find that if you're moving those workloads offsite to cloud, that the provider has to tick that box. And luckily, they have a lot of breadth when it comes to ISOs. I think it's more than Google and Amazon put together. For security, and that will be what we touch on and drill into much more deeply in our third webinar. Microsoft spend $1 billion a year on security, which is a bit eye-watering. I suppose they're cash rich, but even so, it's an awful lot of money, a lot of investment into their platform. Ultimately, it's kind of their credibility on the line if there was a sizable breach. And that's something I'm going to go through in more detail with you as well. Almost like the division of labor between Microsoft's responsibility and our collective responsibility. But for sake of balance, let's go through some of the challenges. I'm sure you'll have some in your head at the moment. I suppose here are some of them. I think back in 2016, cloud was a much harder sell. People's mindsets were much more, when we think about that CapEx versus OpEx conversation, people's preference was much more old school. But whether it's music streaming, monthly gym memberships, or the fact that most of you, your household will have Disney Plus, Netflix, and Amazon Video all running right now concurrently, and probably now TV for House of the Dragon. Just the zeitgeist, the culture, we're so much more open to monthly models. And I think part of that was many of us felt the importance of cash flow during the lockdown and the months that followed. And that's something that we can leverage with cloud. Equally, I think challenges will be the skills and adoption required, because it is quite a big culture shift. There are more moving parts and things that change, and that's why I think you're well placed having these sort of dialogues with ProRant, because we've done plenty with them already historically. But yeah, it is. I know it's a bit of an undertaking, but kudos for jumping into this series. Hopefully it's useful for you. And I suppose, ironically, I say cost is one of the benefits of cloud. We can be economical, but it also can be a challenge if we're not fine-tuning those pricing, like I said. But take the pandemic, right? We were working closely with the team at ProBrand to, when people were unfortunately having to put some staff on furlough, we could reduce the 365 license counts in real time. And we could also reduce the specs of the Azure infrastructure, because if you've got 30% less people interacting with your web app or your SQL server, chances are we can drop the specs and save you some money. So I suppose that's the landscape we're working in. And this is kind of how Microsoft see their where their strengths are. In my view, it's the fact that you can kind of leverage enterprise grade hardware at a much more realistic price than if you were to throw down the cash and buy that upfront, which is nice, because it lets us achieve higher availability of our data. We get more better and faster chipsets and all sorts in our servers. But it does mean we need to bring a different mindset, and this is something that we work quite closely with the team there. We have to shift. It's a different approach, essentially, when we're pricing things up, because with hardware, you'd never really turn a server off. You're just sort of tempting fate that it won't switch back on. But with cloud, we can schedule snoozing of the virtual machines. VMs are billed per hour, at least by default. So there's about 730 in a month. But if you had them on a 9 to 5 scheduling, or 8 to 6, or whatever it's going to be, you're basically saving like 2/3 of your running costs, just like that. So that's quite nice. We also can provision for demand right now rather than projected demand. I suppose the challenge with hardware is we want it to last 5 or 6 years. So inevitably, no matter how well-meaning your account managers and the people quoting will be, it has to be overspec'd. Yeah, but by kind of necessity, because it needs to have that that longevity built into the solution. But with Azure, there isn't that same requirement. We can run things, look at like a monthly spending, look at the Power BI usage reports and stuff, and we can make ongoing changes to the estate that you've got. And I suppose the goal with that is so that essentially you pay as close to your you get as close to your actual demand as possible, when with the resources. It's a bit hard. I don't know why I'm struggling to articulate that. I need another coffee, but you see what I mean with the graph, right? You're trying to get as close to that line as possible. And ways we might do that, appreciate we've got a nice variety of different businesses on the call today, which is great to see. But if I think about ways that we can economize on cost, if we jump to the far left first of the screen, so schools would be perhaps a great opportunity to do things with on and off, with holidays, inset days, bank holidays. There's a lot of time that the kids at least aren't on site. I think also we're seeing with whether it's Hecate with maths, Sam Learning for science, and things like that. So much of the apps and stuff the kids will be using, you're paying like a software subscription for that, and it's not on the local network. It's not even on being powered by local or virtual servers and everything. So there's great opportunity to snooze stuff after school shut. And we can have things like start on Connect if we were doing things like Azure Virtual Desktop, where the session hosts turn off in the evening, but if one of the teachers log in at 7 p.m. to do something into an app, it will when they authenticate using Active Directory, it will turn back on. So you save like 90% of your costs overnight. But if somebody does log in, well, we're ready for it. With fast growth, kind of noticing a lot, there's all sorts of acquisitions going on in the market at the moment. And you might find some of you might be having a recruitment drive coming off the back of COVID and things opening up. This allows you to grow at scale. If we're using things like leveraging Intune and Autopilot and Microsoft Endpoint Manager, it's going to be much easier to kind of enroll new users and get their devices set up and kitted out without necessarily having to be there physically. With unpredictable bursting, I don't know why, but I always go back to 2016 when Trump won the election. The Canadian embassy website crashed. So many Americans were looking at what it would take to flee across the ocean. And well, no, it's not even across the ocean, is it? Across the border. And they weren't anticipating it. None of the pundits were, and they had their workloads locally, and they just couldn't really keep up with it. Yeah. Maybe a slightly more relatable example. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Watchfinder, the business. They restore and resell watches. And a few years ago, when it was still a bit more novel to do it, they were utilizing YouTube ads. The marketing team wanted to get more footfall on the website, and they achieved their goal. But in fact, they achieved it too well. They had so much footfall that the website crashed, and I think it was a bit of a wake-up call for them. And that's sort of what prompted them to look at Azure, look at using cloud. And when they expanded into new territories, like into Europe, then being able to just host that web app in like German central data centers or wherever was a game changer. They didn't need to like lease space or send a team out there. So that's a couple of examples of that. With predictable bursting, brown paper tickets, Ticketmaster, anything like that, even like seasonal businesses, Thorpe Park. There's so many people going, particularly summer. I suppose July is probably the peak, the last few weeks of school when all the coaches go up. But in February, there'll be what, 2 or 3 people wistfully looking at Stealth on the website. People like that would be mad not to be using cloud, because they'd be paying in February for the beef in their specs that they'd need in July. So it just wouldn't make sense. And some of you will be sort of this slide won't resonate as well, because perhaps you need to have things on 24/7. You've got mission critical workload. You might have shift workers. So you're thinking, well, Dave, none of that applies to us. There's still economical options. We can do things like apply reserved instances, which is where you pre-commit to some compute and you get a discount. You might be able to utilize hybrid use benefit in Azure. And that's where you bring your server licensing. As long as it's got software assurance, you can bring it into the cloud and you'll get a reduction on your costs. And the team and I, we can help you with that conversation. If you're like, look, this is what the situation I'm in. I kind of feel like I need to be looking at cloud, but I'm not really sure how to make sure the costs are low. That's of course what we can help with. I think I'll get this out of the way quickly as well. I acknowledged earlier on that I feel like many of you will be in that hybrid cloud or Yeah, I think hybrid IT is actually a better label for that, but a hybrid IT situation where you're utilizing some cloud software and services, but you'll have probably some physical infrastructure as well. But if we look at public and private and define the differences, I don't know how many parents I've got. If I was doing this live, I'd get a show of hands, but I'll assume there's a few of you. So some of you have probably been to places like Centre Parks with the rapids and the awesome slides and stuff. To me, that's kind of like public cloud, or I guess the Roman baths if we were going back thousands of years. It's a public space. You have to rub shoulders with other people, but you're going to have rapids that you probably couldn't build in the back garden. Whereas private cloud, or like having a pool that you build in your back garden, you don't have to queue in line or share the space with people, but you're shouldering all of the costs, all of the maintenance. I feel like that's, for me at least, it's an easier way of kind of articulating the main difference. With private, it's not a shared space, and the costs inevitably, therefore, the economies of scale are not really going to be in your favour. Additionally, I know that there are private cloud offerings that have pretty decent lead times on getting new servers and things set up for you, but inevitably there's still going to be a couple of hours delay. And that's if the partner has kit on hand, but because of the lead time at the moment, that's not a guarantee. So that's a little bit on, I suppose, setting the scene between those. I don't want to drill too deep into IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Some of you will be familiar, but for those that aren't, essentially you've got a sliding scale where we're thinking about ease of use. So take Exchange Online, right? We just use the app, right? I imagine most of you got into this team meeting through your Outlook calendar. Maybe some of you did it through Teams, but at any rate, it's still run on a physical Exchange server, Microsoft side, but we don't have to patch that, manage it, power it, cool it. That's not your headache anymore. It's their logistical nightmare, not yours. And I guess that's the thing there. Whereas if we were doing IaaS, infrastructure as a service, that would be where you'd use an Azure VM and you'd have it running. Well, maybe this wasn't the best example, but just run with me. It'd be as if you were using it as an Exchange server. It wasn't the best example, but you could do it with SQL, right? You could use a SQL server, or in that middle option, PaaS, that would be where you're using the platform, but you're not worrying about the VMs, the servers. So that might be SQL database services. If you've got a developer that you're bringing in externally on a day rate or something, the last thing you're going to want is to have to wait 3 or 4 days for someone to choose an image, set up a VM and put SQL on it. You'd probably prefer to use a consumption-based service that you just pay per hour. It already has the everything ready to go for you. And I have a bit of a silly analogy for it, really. Touch wood, none of us are working late today, but if any of us are and traveling, chances are you might order a takeaway, maybe a Domino's. The benefit is it turns up, you don't have to really do much. But if you're a celiac, gluten intolerant, if you if you live for sweet corn and you want to chuck a whole can of it on, well, I guess you still could do that, but you get what I mean. You can't order it that way. So you've got this sort of you have to make concessions. What you might do is you pull a frozen pizza out the freezer and then you put your sweet corn on, bung it in the oven, and that would be kind of this middle ground. I'm going to stop here because I can't see people's faces. This tends to be a bit of a Marmite analogy. Some people love it, some people hate it. But you might find if you're more technical on this call and you're trying to explain the differences between those to a non-technical audience or member of the business, it might help. I told you that I talk about security as well in more detail. I've talked about Microsoft's investment. They also have a red and blue team. I don't know if you ever go to family barbecues and tell people you work in IT and their eyes glaze over. In fact, I know you do because we all do. But some people have cool jobs in IT. Microsoft literally, their red and blue team, they spend their whole day trying to hack into the platform. Whoever wins after a month gets a massive bonus and then they switch. It's kind of like cowboys and Indians on the playground, but for adults. But yeah, so there's so much, they know their credibility is on the line and they have to keep the platform secure. But what they don't market that vocally, because it's less glossy, messaging, is that only covers, well, yeah, the platform. When your data is residing in the data center, and as long as ports and things aren't left open, due diligence has been observed, it is Microsoft's responsibility to keep that safe. However, when the data is in transit, say from your customer site or your endpoint device if you work from home, we've got that the travel between that point and the Microsoft data center. You need to make sure the data is encrypted. We need a network gateway, the firewalls, all these things in place. We need to secure the endpoints and roll out, best practice like MFA and single sign-on. All of this stuff is still required. And the reason I want to pause here is because I've been working quite closely with Microsoft for, I suppose, the last 7 years now, and they're taking a much firmer stance on this these days. Historically, if people had not, MFA, whatever, if people have been a bit late to adopt best practice, depending on the context, Microsoft sometimes would, be there to save the day, bail out. But they're not feeling that way anymore. I think they're tired of it. So basically, we've got to make sure we're doing all these things. And if we look at maybe cloud more generally, rather than Azure specifically, like why are we all here? Why am I talking to you about it? I think we have a sort of ever expanding estate. We've got all sorts of third-party products. And look, I'm here to get excited about Microsoft, but I am quite vendor agnostic, just like the team at Pro Brand. Often, I think the Microsoft stack's pretty awesome, but there will be parts where, whether it's Veeam for backup or whatever, that it makes sense where people are bringing in some complementary third-party products. But that actually almost sometimes compounds the problem. We've got multiple products, we've got data coming in from all sorts of places, and it's hard to sift through, it's hard to manage and ring fence and keep our users safe. And yeah, taking that user point further, I guess it's a massive quality of life improvement for all of us, the advent of home working. I'm at home at the moment. However, it was for those of you that are technical or security here, it's probably given a few sleepless nights, particularly when it was sort of dropped on us and everybody had to be at home a couple of years ago and there wasn't much time to prepare. It's great for users, it's great for us as everyday people, but actually it's more of a logistical headache for you. There's lots more moving parts and points of failure. So it's an opportunity for a better work life balance, but at the same time, there's lots that needs to be doing. And it's one of the reasons that Mark and I are going to talk to you about Azure Virtual Desktop in the second session, because it's brilliant. There's lots of reasons it's brilliant, but one of them is that it gives you all the tools you need to basically roll this stuff out. Whether it's in tune with the device policies, whether it's Active Directory with some of the stuff with MFA and single sign-on and stuff. The reality is we can't eliminate user error, and we're naive if we think we can. 10% of users click on phishing emails, and that will be in your organization, mine, Microsoft. It's people at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how our marketing is or what our policies are. So therefore, well, actually it does matter the policies. What we've got to ensure is that we reduce the chance of human error by making it as hard for people to mess up as possible. And this is one of the great things about Azure Virtual Desktop and the way it's structured. And I'll almost leave that as a point for us to prove for the second module, because time, I do want to make sure I don't overrun. But it is terrific, and it does let us do some of those things. It also means that we can address the needs of remote workers, allow them to bring their own devices. What a massive thing. Particularly younger people. I don't know about your offices. There seems to be lots of polarized. I hear support people in the office scrapping over Apple versus Microsoft. To me, it's a bit of noise. But even so, from a device point of view, people often quite like to use their own devices, and we can enable that. You can enroll a personal device into Intune, even if, touch wood, things go sour and someone leaves the business. Policies can be set up program side so that corporate data is removed from that device, but nothing else. It isn't the barrier it used to be at all, which is great, because it might mean for some of you, you don't need to buy a bunch of thin clients again in 3 years' time. Out with the Chromebooks. You might just use AVD and use whatever devices people want to use. I know that's only going to be some people, some of you have requirements for them, but it's still options. I think that's what I wanted today to be about. A high level, exploring lots of your options. I kind of touched on this, and there's a product, there's some solutions we'll talk about in the third webinar around security. And one of the challenges we'll hope to help you, solution you can use to overcome is just the volume, the frequency, and the variety of data we're having to sift through. We're trying to detect alerts and patterns for kind of potential sort of problematic behavior or bad actors trying to breach the network and stuff. It's much harder to do now than it used to be. And you often find kind of legacy SIEM solutions that are on premise aren't too well equipped to ingest signals from cloud-based apps and things like that. So I'm kind of setting the scene for this third webinar, but that we will be talking about that in more detail. And I suppose everyone talks about digital transformation, don't they? It's one of the buzz terms, I suppose. But what are we really trying to do? I guess we want to improve worker productivity within the organization. We want to make sure that we haven't got any chinks in our kind of security strategy. Maybe streamlining the software and products and things that people are using, and improve the way that we can analyze the data and cope with the data that's coming into us as a business. Now you might be thinking, oh, all right, Dave, some of this is quite interesting, but where would we start? I think I know I've already talked about the software end of support, yeah, where if you have legacy apps that require you not to be on Windows 10, that isn't, or 11, I keep forgetting, guys. In my defense, right, Microsoft said to us, what, 2 years ago, there won't be another operating system. So yeah, forgive the blunder. I'm in denial that Windows 11 even exists. It's cool though. But the point is, you have that as an option to move those workloads and essentially run on an older version. For people that are looking at a hardware refresh that's approaching, this might be where you look at maybe moving some of those workloads into Azure. You might be able to, rather than having an on-premise app server or something, you might be able to use something like a web app, and there'll just be less to manage there. Hopefully, because I imagine some of you, the challenge you've got as well, hardware, because of inflation, hardware is more expensive than it was. Some of us will have had a tough couple of years, understandably, and IT budgets either won't have budged up or they'll have perhaps gone down a little. So if that's like a compounding factor against the fact that hardware is more expensive and nobody can get any. So I imagine that then in 6 months, a year's time, when that conversation comes around, maybe cloud's looking more compelling than it had done previously. Equally, if your NAS and everything's running out for storage, you're running out of stuff there. Rather than waiting, what you might do is utilize Azure for some like an offsite storage location. So yeah, I'm kind of touching on a few of these, and additionally, if you have got remote workers, and perhaps you feel like it certainly as COVID got the drop on everyone, you may feel like did the best could in that situation, and things are looking pretty good. But there might be a few things to harden up or tweak, and that again, this can help with that. And I suppose what that whole process is we're looking at what hardware can we retire, what could we repurpose, so which servers could we, if we put our web app in Azure, we can now use that server for something else. Or what are we going to retain? Are we going to keep our domain controller on premise? Because, I think Microsoft's Achilles heel is identity in some respects. They're still sorting that out in some ways. So you might think, I don't want to use any of the current workarounds. I'm just going to keep it down here and AD sync it up to the cloud. Or you might think, actually, Dave, I'm not sold on that. This particular application, it runs better on site, latency issues. We're just going to replace the server. But I guess that's the kind of the decision making we've got to look at. This is interesting because this is, I suppose, more just it's more of a commercial thing. But Microsoft, they used to have their three pillars, modern workplace, Azure, and Dynamics. Whereas now you've got business applications for the Dynamics and Power App stuff. Modern work encompasses all sorts of stuff, but pretty much most of licensing sits there. But you'll notice infrastructure obviously being Azure, data and AI, digital app and innovation, but even security, about half of this component or pillar ends up being things like Cloud Defender, Azure Sentinel, these sorts of services. So just interesting that even the way that Microsoft are splitting things out commercially, so much of it is focused towards the Azure platform. And I suppose I've yet to define it in some respects. It's just Microsoft's public cloud platform. It's their Center Park swimming pool. It's their public environment. It's AWS. It's Google. Except it's not. Fundamentally, it is. Yeah, but there's lots of ways I think Microsoft differentiate and reasons that it can be a good fit. One thing I've liked is their messaging is way more nuanced than it was. Back in 2016, it was like, jump into the cloud. Oh, why aren't you in here yet? No, there was a lot of pressure, I think, trickling down to get people to move. And I think they've started to realize that for a lot of organizations, hybrid is the best that they're going to get out of it. As in, like, they shouldn't expect that the company's ever going to be fully cloud-based necessarily. So they're now releasing a lot of software and tools and applications that are suited towards managing from cloud. Yeah, rather than necessarily getting everything in there. So something like Azure Sentinel as a security solution, you can use that in tandem with physical infrastructure, multi-cloud, all sorts of stuff. And I suppose the most annoying, the biggest challenge with Azure is just the staggering amount of options and services available. I know it can be a bit daunting, but as I said earlier, about 50% of, if I think about the partners that I work with across the UK, 50% of our Microsoft Azure bill that comes through for all of that is servers, it's VMs. So there's nothing too mysterious about that, is there? Storage, connectivity requirements, and then the desktop services, RDS being the dinosaur one, but Azure Virtual Desktop being the new and improved option. A lot of what customers like yourselves end up gravitating towards are these common services. People are dabbling with data and AI, but I think it feels like it's in their infancy, especially for like smaller organizations. The reason I wanted to go over this slide is because a lot of Microsoft marketing is so fantastical and perhaps unrelatable. And it's just to remind people that a lot of solutions are a lot more bread and butter than they might seem. How Microsoft differentiate rather. They've got over 60 data centers, more than Google and Amazon put together. And you might think, well, okay, that's just a bragging right. What does it mean for us as a business? Well, if you've got international workers, they're always going to be closer to a data center wherever they are, so they'll have less latency and delay and better user performance. But equally, if you want higher availability of your data and storage and stuff, you can have it in multiple different locations, all over the place, which is nice. Kind of talked about ISOs, so I might not go into more detail here, but yeah, there are breakdowns on the Microsoft Trust Center that kind of, there's white papers and case studies around data sovereignty, because I know that can be a hot topic, what ISOs they have, and all these sorts of things. Why Azure though? I've said it's kind of like the others, but how does it differ? One thing I like about the Azure platform is that you're not locked into using Microsoft's OS and software and services. In fact, here's a weird stat: 70% of VMs in Azure are actually Linux boxes. Sounds odd, but it makes sense when you think about it, because the OS, like the cost-wise, it's just you're basically paying raw compute, especially if you go like CentOS or whatever. So like it kind of it does make sense, but it's nice that they're somewhat open. You know, they bought GitHub, made that acquisition a few years ago, and developers can log in using that. It's a lot more open than it might seem. But I think Microsoft's biggest strength is the sheer integration of the products. You know, you and I could argue about whether Salesforce is better than Dynamics, but I feel like those sort of conversations can get lost in the weeds, and we miss the point, because if we've got a payroll server, we need some kind of stock and inventory management application, email, blah blah blah. When we add it all together, the needs of a typical business, that's where I think Microsoft excel, because they are, you know, you see in all the Gartner Magic Quadrant studies they do, with who's good at virtualization and blah blah blah. Like Microsoft don't win a single category, which is kind of weird for me to bring up, but they're right on the heels of the dominant player in every single market, and they're the only vendor on the planet like that, whether we like it or not. So there is um, that integrated ecosystem. So not only are they good at all these things, but those products are integrated. Windows Defender communicates with Dynamics Business Central, which talks to the Defender for Business features, and we can plug all that data into Power BI. We've got this sort of thriving integrated mashup of products, which tends to streamline processes and help make your workers and stuff more productive. On this slide, sometimes repetition is key. The thing I'm going to home in on again is the fact that you got the chance to leverage enterprise grade level hardware at a much more realistic price. We think about Azure VMs. We're on version 6s, I think, soon for the D series VMs. And every time you get a new versions, you get new chipsets, better performance. And what you find, one of the things that Mark and I do is we'll look at customer estates and we'll optimize that. If you want to have that done every quarter or something, we can do that. And it means then that you're getting on the latest and greatest hardware, but you're not having to wait. Whether the alternative's leasing or buying outright, you're not having to wait. You're always jumping in. And of course, the scale of the platform is colossal, but I suppose we all know that. And I think this is the last thing I'm going to touch on here is I know it's complicated. I've done a massive tour of so many different things already today. I've talked about kind of the fact that we can now use Azure to centrally manage our on-prem services and potentially other clouds, whether it's AWS or Google. I know it's complicated. There's a lot to consider, and that's why I'm hoping we can have more of these dialogues as we move forward. So I think I'm going to stop sharing now and pass over to Mark to take the baton and continue.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. I'm just going to pop up my own sharing here for a moment. So let's just hit that. Hopefully you can all see my slide deck and hear from me properly. Dave, give me a thumbs up if that's looking good.
Yeah, looking good to me.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Dave. That's been a fantastic primer on Azure there. I'm going to be talking next about some of the ways that ProBrand can help you get started on your cloud journey, how we can support you in that process. I work for ProBrand as a cloud architect, and it's my job to sort of talk to customers, understand their requirements, map out how we're going to get them from A to B. But of course, one of the first things that a lot of people want to know after they've heard about Azure, after they've reviewed whether or not cloud might be the right thing for them, is some of the basics. This is all very well and good, but how do I pay for this? How much is it going to cost me? How do I keep control of billing? These are all of the things that you're going to want to understand, as well as how can the technology help my business? How can we use services from the cloud to help execute the business mission? There are all sorts of different areas where customers have a variety of questions. So let's jump right in and have a look at things like the basics, because if you want to get started with Microsoft Azure, yes, you're going to need some sort of subscription with Microsoft. And if you come to ProBrand for that subscription, it means that you're going to be billed for that on a simple monthly invoice. No need to whip out the credit card and pop that into the Microsoft website. You can come to ProBrand and get your Azure consumption bill paid for through a simple monthly invoice. That way we can help you make it easy to keep track of your spend. We can provide monitoring solutions so that you can see your monthly costs in an easy to navigate dashboard. So we want to help you by providing that billing support, billing transparency, so that you've got insight into your Azure costs and your Azure subscription. There are a few different ways we get to do that, but in order to get started, it's pretty simple. You can just authorize ProBrand as a billing partner. ProBrand can then create an Azure plan, your Azure subscription, or several, depending on your requirements, and you can then start allocating Azure resources to that subscription. And any resources you allocate to that subscription that we've created for you through our billing platform are then going to be billed through that monthly invoice. as I say. Now, when it comes to that billing transparency and having insight into your spend, this is where we can provide you that easy to access dashboard. We provide you self-service access to this so that you can view what's going on in your Azure billing at any time. You've got full transparency, not just of previous bills, but also the current monthly spend as well, so that you've got a bit of a forecast there and a bit of insight into what that spend looks like, broken down month by month so you can see your spend, broken down service by service so you can see where your money is actually going. You can filter this view, click on a month. So if we click on September here, we can see the various costings in Azure for that month's bill, so that when you get your invoice through and someone in the accountancy department is saying, well, there's a line item here that says Microsoft Azure, what is actually going on there? What's behind that? I need more of a breakdown. Well, you can get that breakdown here in our dashboard. And some of you may recognize that this is a Power BI report. If you've worked with Power BI reports before, you'll know that you can drill down into this in all sorts of different ways, so that if there's a particular element here that's costing a little bit more one month than previously, you can drill into that, have a look and explore why that was costing more money, find out what's going on. We want to give you that full transparency and full billing support. Plus, we can give you custom alerting thresholds for your billing. So you obviously have a certain degree of reporting and dashboards going on within the Azure portal itself, but we can also provide an additional alert that you can get, so that if your spending looks like it's going to exceed a threshold that you can define, you can get an additional alert coming from our platform. Now, why would you want extra alerts coming through? Well, there's a variety of reasons. Some people will set their Azure portal to send the alerts through to the IT admin, whereas the accountancy department, they might want their own alerts around billing as well. You could set it up in that way. Some people appreciate having a bit of a belt and braces approach, where they're getting their alerts from Microsoft, but they're also getting one from our billing platform as well, so that if there's any overspend being forecast, they know about it first. So again, we want to make sure that we're helping you keep control of billing and providing you that transparency. And our platform can provide that for your Azure plans and your Azure subscriptions. Our platform can also provide access to a whole range of Microsoft Cloud licensing, not just Azure, but seat-based services as well, Microsoft 365, Dynamics, Power Platform, individual components like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, perpetual licenses as well. There's a whole catalog of services available here for commercial pricing, non-profit, education pricing. It's all available in this platform and in this catalog. Now, this CSP licensing framework provides a number of advantages and freedoms for you. Firstly, it does, as I say, provide a full catalog of Microsoft Cloud services, including some that you won't necessarily find available as a just, click to buy, pop your credit card number in option on the Microsoft website. So we provide that full catalog of cloud services. As I say, that does cover not just commercial pricing, but if you're a non-profit, if you're a charity, those prices are available. If you're a school or another educational establishment, you've got those prices available as well through our platform. This is linked to Microsoft's backend and your tenancy, which means any licenses that are provisioned through this environment are available in your tenancy in a matter of minutes. So it's a very, very rapid platform for getting new licenses on board. If you've got new starters, if you've got new people that you need to allocate licenses for, you've got a change in products that you want to execute, you can add these licenses to your environment and have them available to use in a matter of minutes. You can mix and match monthly and annual licenses in your tenancy. If you've got seasonal staff where you want to attach some monthly licenses to them and then cancel those down at the end of their tenure, you can do that all again within this platform, within this environment. Perpetual licenses too, you've got your SQL license that you need to buy. It's all available in here to purchase against your environment. We can provide you self-service access to this for rapid setups. If you want your own login to this platform so that you can add licenses yourself at any time. And again, as mentioned, because it's got that link to your back end, you can come into the platform, add the licenses that you need, hop over to the Microsoft admin portal, and within a matter of minutes, those new licenses are there. No need to wait for an order to be processed or anything to clear in that regard. Those new licenses are just available. You could log into this in the middle of the night, add licenses, and you'd be away up and running with your new licenses in a matter of minutes. Billing reports are available in portal. You saw the dashboard that we can provide you there for the Microsoft Azure spend reporting, but for all of your licenses, we've got information and reporting in the dashboard as well. You can go and see your spend for seat-based licenses, any perpetual licenses that you've added. You can pick a month, see the billing, see the breakdown in there at any time. All of this is available to you at no extra cost. We don't charge a fee for this billing platform environment, and there are no hidden costs. When we say there's no extra cost, we mean it. We don't pad our license costs. We don't do anything to put in place any kind of hidden fees here. When we say it's no extra cost, we mean it. Now, we've heard a lot, obviously, about the Azure environment and the Azure platform. But again, when it comes to how you get started, it's going to be a case of looking at this and saying, well, what kind of resources are we going to be provisioning in Microsoft Azure? Now, this is an area where ProBrand can help get you started, provision the resources that you require, explore what kind of services you might need to put in place, and help execute and implement that using our engineering services. But how many of us start from a greenfield blank canvas? You know, very few of us. Most of us will have an existing investment in resources in our on-premises environments with workloads and applications that we want to maybe migrate to the cloud. And again, we're going to want to know, well, if I move my server workloads, if I move some or even all of my virtual machines up to Microsoft Azure, for example, and start taking advantage of the infrastructure as a service offerings available in Azure, again, how much is that going to cost? You want an answer to that question. You want to be able to go forward understanding what your kind of cost exposure is going to look like in Microsoft Azure. And straight away, there can be a challenge there, how to understand what those costings are going to look like. Well, this is where ProBrand can help by executing an Azure Migrate assessment, where we can analyze your on-premises servers, not just reviewing the specifications of those virtual machines, the resources that are currently allocated to them, but also looking at the performance profile of those virtual machines so that we can right size what you would require in Microsoft Azure and produce a full costing estimate. You might have virtual machines at the moment that are oversized. And by analyzing their real performance requirements, we can make sure that the virtual machine sizes that we align in Microsoft Azure in that cost report are right sized. After all, when you move to Azure, when you move to the cloud platform, one of the main benefits here is that you're going to get very, very easy scaling. If you need to allocate more resources to a virtual machine, you're not worrying about the underlying constraints of a hardware platform. You know, it's Microsoft's data center. They've got the resources, so you're not having to worry about this. From the perspective of scaling, if you need more resources to a VM, you don't need to oversize a VM to start with so that you've stamped out your corner of a resource platform. You can scale at any time. So we can right-size virtual machines, safe in the knowledge that if you need to scale them later on, you'll be able to do so. We can build scaling in to the price report. So if you tell us, I want to add 10% for growth, 20% for growth, whatever you need to add, we can build that into the pricing estimates so that all of that is baked in. We can build in the pricing for low priority versus high priority virtual machines. If you've got critical VMs where you need to make sure that they've got the highest levels of SLA from Microsoft, we can make sure that that's factored into the pricing. But for lower priority VMs, maybe test and dev workloads where you don't need the same SLAs, we can factor that in, again, right sizing not just the VMs, but right sizing the costs for you around the requirements that you have in cloud. We can factor all of that in to make sure that your cost estimate is right for you and is accurate for your needs in your environment. If you decide to go ahead and migrate, we can use the same tools to actually execute the migration and cutover of your workloads to the cloud. And again, as mentioned, this could be full or hybrid. You could decide to go ahead and migrate just some of your workloads and leave other legacy applications on premises if it's right to leave them in those environments. We can execute a partial migration, moving over only the workloads that you need to migrate to cloud. So this doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. You can make the choice as to what gets moved up to the cloud. Now, for small business environments, there are a range of ProBrand services that are still going to be relevant in your Azure environment, in your virtual workloads that you might move up to Microsoft Azure. Things like ProBrand Managed Antivirus. If you've got some Windows servers that you're deploying or migrating to Microsoft Azure, you're going to want to think about how you protect that from an anti-malware, antivirus perspective. And if you're looking for a provider that can just take over the headaches of monitoring, managing, updating all of those agents on a day-to-day basis, ProBrand can provide that through our managed antivirus service. Spirit, our server monitoring and optimization solution. For those of you unfamiliar with this, this is our proactive support offering for servers where we can monitor virtual machines, looking for problems before they arise, optimize those virtual machines, implementing solutions like patch management, for example, again, maintaining the security of those workloads, all provided as part of our proactive support offering, Spirit. We can provide break-fix support services as well. If you're looking to make sure that you've got someone local that you can call in the event that you need assistance with your environment in Azure, whether it be the Azure environment itself or workloads that you've got running in Azure, such as Windows virtual machines, for example, ProBrand support services can be available to you to answer the call and make sure that we can resolve those issues for you. Our managed backup solution, when you're deploying data and workloads into Azure or into other environments like Microsoft 365, you still need to think about backing up that data. Solutions like Microsoft 365, for example, I always sort of say to people when they ask me, is it backed up? I would say sort of, because some of the kind of capabilities that you get in Microsoft 365, I would suggest that it's more deletion protection than a true backup. If you're looking for a true backup service, then ProBrand can provide that through our managed backup service. We can also offer backup for data that you're storing in Microsoft Azure as well. So again, if you've got things like virtual servers that you've moved to Azure, you want to make sure that they're backed up, and you're looking for a provider that can take over the headache of monitoring the backup, make sure that it's working, verifying it. ProBrand can provide that through our managed backup service. Cloud Firewall, if you've got internet-facing resources that you're publishing through Microsoft Azure, again, you need to think about a firewall, you need to think about some sort of protection. And again, this is an area where ProBrand can assist with firewall services that can be deployed into the cloud to protect the workloads in that environment. That brings me to the end of my slide deck. There will, of course, be more webinars coming up. Webinar 2, where we'll be looking at Azure Virtual Desktop, and Webinar 3, where we'll be looking at cybersecurity in the cloud. But now we're going to move over to our Q&A section. So I'm just going to hand back now and I guess find out if we've got any questions that are being posted yet, or if you want to post any questions, pop them in.
Thanks for that. To our webinar guests, I hope the presentation has given you some insight into the steps that you can take to start your Azure journey and grow your business in the cloud. We've not had any questions as yet, so just whilst we wait for any questions to come through, I'd just like to let you know that the link for the feedback form is there in the chat, and I'll just share my screen there. So this is the form that it takes you to. You can leave your details there and let us know which part you liked most of all. And importantly here, you can claim your free cloud review, your proof of concept, register your interest in the proof of concept, and let us know if you're interested in claiming some free Azure consumption. So you'll need to do that through that feedback form. Okay, thank you. I'll just ask my colleague Lindsay. Has anything else come through, Lindsay? For any questions?
We have had. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had a couple of questions. I'll just ask them quickly. I'm aware we're short on time. That someone, one of our attendees is wanting to know they're interested in the security that's available within Azure. Can you talk through that functionality provided by Azure?
Yeah, of course. So we'll definitely go into lots of detail on that on our third webinar, but I'm happy to give like an overview. So you've got things like Cloud Defender that runs in Azure, which is kind of like the counterpart to Defender for Business. I find some of their new name changing a little confusing. But you've also got tools like Sentinel, which was one of the Azure Sentinel. That was one of the products I touched on earlier that has the SIEM capabilities. What's really cool about Sentinel is it also has like machine like AI and threat pattern detection and all sorts of cool features. That's a very, very quick answer for you. But what I would say is I'd encourage you to jump onto the third webinar because it's all about cloud security and largely from an Azure context too. So hope we see you there.
Yeah, and just to expand on that and offer some insight myself, I suppose, again, to echo Dave's comments there, we're going to be exploring this in a lot more detail on webinar 3, so don't miss out on that one. Cybersecurity obviously being an important and ever-changing topic. Whenever these sort of things crop up, you'll hear people like me and other cybersecurity experts. We'll talk about a lot of things like the basics, like we'll talk about things like multi-factor authentication, for example. But even this is a moving target. So you look at the Uber breach a few weeks ago. That was the result of what was referred to as a multi-factor authentication fatigue attack, where the hackers had got the passwords. They knew that they were going to come up against that barrier of multi-factor authentication, but they just kept logging in, kept trying to log in, knowing that eventually someone was just going to smash the accept button on their phone, get bored, press accept, and then that they've let their hackers in. So what we're seeing is this kind of war, this battle between hacker and provider, trying to sort of constantly stay ahead of each other. But this does lead to the evolution of these things. So multi-factor authentication itself is changing. So you're getting solutions like number matching, geographical validation. There's all sorts of other features that are being added to multi-factor in order to make it stronger. But a lot of the time you will find that these kind of features aren't turned on by default because they have an impact on the end user experience. You need to check that. You need to test those things. If they're going to be right for you, do you need to do some user education? All of these things need to be looked at, which again is just highlighting that fact that it's an ever moving target. It's never a case of, right, we've got that in place and that's done, we're now secure. It's a constant ever changing battle where you need to review on a regular basis what the latest security advancements are that you might need to invest in your environment. Again, this is another reason why it's a shameless plug for ProBrand, that we want to sort of be that partner to try and be proactive around security with you to make sure that these things are put in place and that you've got the latest protections for your environment.
That's great.
Excellent.
Thanks very much. I think that's all the time that we've got for questions at the moment. But if you do have any questions that haven't been answered today, feel free to get in touch with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Have a lovely day.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.